Good evening. My name is Andrew Wong, and I'm a junior at the Walsh School of Foreign Service, majoring in international politics with a concentration in security studies and a minor in history. Over the last couple of years, I have attended events hosted by GU Politics, participated in discussion groups, and served as an editor for On the Record, GU Politics' online journal of politics. I'm also the president of Georgetown's chapter of Students for Haley, a grassroots student organization dedicated to electing Nikki Haley as president. During the Republican primary this past year, our chapter helped rally support for Nikki right here on Georgetown's campus. We organized voter outreach in the DMV area, and we supported the Haley campaign at rallies. I'm extremely proud of all the work we did and the tireless dedication of all our members, some of whom here are with us in the front tonight. Tonight, it's my pleasure to introduce former U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, Nikki Haley. In 2010, at age 38, Nikki R. Haley was elected the 116th governor of South Carolina. She was the youngest governor in the country and the only minority female governor in America. To date, she is the only female governor in South Carolina history. During Governor Haley's tenure, South Carolina was a national leader in economic development. Known as the Beast of the Southeast, the state's unemployment rate hit a 15-year low. It saw over $20 billion in new capital investment, and her administration announced new jobs in every county of the state. In 2013, Nikki's husband, Michael, a combat veteran, deployed to Afghanistan to fight in the global war on terror, making her the first governor in U.S. history to have their spouse deployed. The people of South Carolina decisively reelected Governor Haley in 2014. 2 years later, Time magazine named her one of the 100 most influential people in the world. In 2016, at age 45, President Donald Trump nominated Governor Haley to be the United States Ambassador to the United Nations. In that role, she served as a member of the President's cabinet and on the National Security Council. As ambassador, she ensured the American people saw value for their investment, defended U.S. interests, kept our country safe, stood up to dictators, and championed human rights around the world. For her work at the UN, Forbes named her one of the world's 100 most powerful women. After serving in the Trump administration, she founded Stand for America and the Stand for America PAC. At age 51, Haley ran as a Republican candidate for president while her husband was deployed overseas. In 2024, she outlasted 13 other candidates and became the first Republican woman to win a presidential primary. She continues to fight for limited government, fiscal responsibility, and a strong foreign policy that keeps America safe, has the backs of our allies, and holds our enemies to account. Currently, she serves as a Walter P. Stern Chair of the Hudson Institute and hosts a weekly podcast, Nikki Haley Live, on SiriusXM. Nikki is married to Major Michael Haley and has 2 children. She is a 2-time New York Times bestselling author for With All Due Respect and If You Want Something Done. She will be joined by Rick Wiley, current GU Politics Fellow, Republican strategist, and former senior advisor to Nikki Haley for president, and Mo Alethi, GU Politics Executive Director. Following her conversation with Rick and Mo, Ambassador Haley will take questions from you guys, the students. Make sure to join the conversation on social media by tagging @GU Politics. Now, without further ado, please join me in welcoming to the stage Mo Alethi, Rick Wiley, and former U.S. Ambassador to United Nations, Nikki Haley.
Hoya Saxa. Boy, Sachs, everyone, you got quite a crowd for you tonight.
I mean, it's a good-looking crowd, right?
Right. Thanks, everyone, for spending part of your evening with us. So this is part of one of my favorite event series we do at GU Politics, our Reflections on Running series. We all see presidential candidates on TV or on our phones all the time, right? Almost to the point where they can become caricatures. So this series, which we started back in 2015, is designed to bring former candidates to this stage to talk with you about what it's really like at a human level to run for president and to explore a little bit what they learned along the way, what they learned about voters, what they learned about the process, what they learned about the country, and a little bit about what they learned about themselves. So, Ambassador, Governor,
Nikki,
welcome.
Those are moments in time. It's Nikki.
So I want to start at the beginning of this process. So like you wake up one day and decide, I'm going to run for president of the United States. What goes into that decision? What compels you to believe that you are the right person in the moment for that job?
A lot goes into it, and I think everybody decides differently, right? I actually do think women and men probably process that a little bit differently in how they do it. You know, from my standpoint, you know, you got to think of your family first, because they're the ones that are going to feel it the most. And my family knew it from, you know, my runs for governor or when I ran against a 30-year incumbent in a primary. They were all really nasty races. And so you don't want to put your family through something unless you know you're 100% committed. The second thing is, I needed to know that I had the mental strength and the physical endurance to do it. And so while it was kind of being talked about, but I wasn't sure, you know, we were doing Stand for America. We were getting good policy out there. We were doing all those things. And I was trying to think, what would be the biggest challenge I could do mentally and physically to test myself? Not just for running, but just to make sure that you're at the top of your game. And I had never run, physically run. You know, I played tennis in high school, but it was one of those things, I can't run. So I was like, okay, you know what? I'm going to see if I can run. And so I started running. And then I trained for a half marathon. And then I ran a half marathon. And it was after that I was like, I can do this. And the reason is, when you run, think about it. For runners, those of you that are runners, there's a point of physical pain, but there's a point of a mental block. And your brain starts to protect you. And it tells you you can't go any further, even though your body knows you can. And when you go through that conflict of physical pain and mental discipline, the ability to overcome what your body is saying and tell yourself, but I can do it. It was the perfect thing for me. I don't say that anybody that runs for office has to run a half marathon, but for me, I needed to know if I was going to put my family through this, if I was going to put my team through it, if I was going to go through it. I knew if I could do that I had what it took. The other reason is, you got to be a little crazy to be in politics anyway. You really do. I mean, I acknowledge that about myself. But the reason you do it is because you know you can move the ball. That really is the reason you do it. The reason you do it is because you know you can make people's lives better. You know you could help those people. I mean, the part I loved about being governor was you make decisions to really improve your state, but the stories you love are the ones the cameras never see. It's the things no one ever knows. And when you can lift up everybody by making tough decisions and hard decisions and move that ball, you never get that out of your head. So all through governor, but then to turn around and do it as you an ambassador. To go and, you know, every day I said it felt like you were putting on body armor. You knew you were going to have a fight. You just didn't know which country you were fighting that day. But the ability to be able to do that and stand strong and really make sure America's voice got out there, it was moving the ball. And so moving the ball in a way that you know people benefit because of what you do, that's the reason you run.
I mean, you alluded to this a little bit. every candidate has to brace themselves for the craziness of a presidential campaign. And there's a lot that comes at you. There's a lot that's grueling for you. It's grueling for your family. It's grueling on your staff. You got to figure out the crazy math of winning enough delegates. And you also had the added craziness of just the uniqueness of this Republican primary, right? Given, that a former president was running in it. What worried you the most going into that decision?
Again, for me, it was my family. It was, and look, we didn't know my husband Michael was going to get deployed. I would not recommend running for president and have your spouse get deployed at the same time. I had already announced before that happened. And so mine was, how do I make sure the kids are going to be okay? How do I make sure that Michael's going to be okay? We took care of my parents, so they live with us. And so it was making sure that that was okay. So it was just making sure that I could go do those things, because I always knew if I was a good mom and a good wife, I'd be good at what I did. If one of those was off, I was off. And so making sure that was ready, I knew that I knew my stuff. I knew that I had the strength to do it. I knew that I was passionate about it. And I knew that I was committed to do whatever it took to get my voice out to as many people as possible. So I was in the right mental space to say, okay, let's do this. Now, where was the media? Where was the political environment? Political environment of all the other candidates, if you think of the 14, it was all like, is Trump going to run? Is Trump not going to run? Is Trump going to run? To me, it didn't matter if he was going to run. I knew that I was the right person at that time to go forward. And the lesson I will tell you is tune out that noise. Make a smart decision. Make sure you're ready. Make sure you know what you're in for. Make sure you have family support. You can't do it without family support. But don't let the naysayers tell you why you shouldn't. Because your job is, if you know in your gut that you're supposed to do this and that you know you can make things better, the more naysayers that come at you is more of the reason why you should do it.
Tell me a little bit about, you just mentioned Michael being deployed, and I sat through many dinners with you, but what was that like? You often describe him as your right arm. So how do you, and on a day off, what was it like to come home? Michael wasn't there, what was that like?
Out of the house.
Your kids were out of the house.
My dogs are looking at me like, where have you been? Michael is like my right arm. We met when I was 17. He was my first boyfriend. We dated for 7 years. We've been married for 28. But more than that, in every political aspect, he's always been my support. So at every debate I ever did, when I was on stage, I was always looking at him. I was always like, that was my comfort. That is where, so the idea that he wasn't going to be there was, okay, how do I do this? And my kids, who are 22 and 25 now, I have one who is always been political. Nayland has always been political. He's always got something to say about politics, all of that. I have one, Rena, who doesn't have a political bone in her body. She's a pediatric nurse. When I was at the UN, I remember people would say, what does your mom do? And she's like, she works in New York. Like she's that disconnected. But she knew that her dad was my source to get through those debates. And so she made it upon herself to always sit in that seat and always look at me. And at times in those debates, when it got heated or things were going on, and I knew she didn't know half of what they were talking about, she was like, it was so sweet to see how the family stepped up and how my older brother was trying to be supportive and how Nayland was on the campaign bus with us and doing that. But for Michael, he was in Djibouti, so he's, halfway around the world. He was awake when I was asleep. I was awake when he was asleep. He was watching it from afar, so very hard on him to watch what's happening. He would get up in the middle of the night to watch every debate that I did. So I would text him during the day, all the things that I would normally text him. And when I'd go to sleep, I'd wake up and he would have answered all of those things. And then he would text me back. And then we usually got to speak once a day. But it was going home when you're tired. It was good to sleep in my own bed. But there was nobody there except for my parents who were not well. So taking care of my parents too. So it was a lot. I mean, it was.
Nayland and Michael have great Twitter feeds, by the way. Got them in a little trouble sometimes.
Yes, yes. And I would say get off the social media, yes.
Amen. Let's talk a little bit about voters. You met a lot of people out there. You did a lot of town halls. You worked it. Are there particular voters or moments that, looking back, stood out to you? Any moments that inspired you or that shook you?
Every bit of this inspired me. Every single bit. When you go out there and you have a town hall, you don't know who's walking in that door. You don't know if they're Republicans, Independents, Democrats. You don't know who it is. You don't know if it's people working for the other side. And you go and you tell your story, and then you take questions from everybody, unvetted. It is the best debate practice you could possibly have. But what you see is people who love America, who are genuinely concerned about the future. And it would be different. In Iowa, when you just look at education, in Iowa, they cared a lot about school choice. In New Hampshire, they cared a lot about transparency in education. So you had to listen. You couldn't talk about the same issues in every area. You needed to talk about what they were feeling, what they were thinking. And that's part of it. The only way you learn that is to listen. And so once you listen to what the challenges are of that area, Iowa, very agricultural driven. New Hampshire, very independent, live free or die state, right? And then you go into South Carolina. I mean, through it all, we did 25 primaries. We did 5 debates. You see a lot of people. But I will tell you, I came away with complete faith of how blessed we are. Because there's something about democracy where you can go and you have to be humble to do this. And you go out there and you put yourself out there in the name of serving the people you're talking to. And it's just, I can't think of a more humbling thing. If you ever run for office, it's just begging. You're begging all the time. You're begging for money. You're begging for them to put yard signs up. You're begging, for votes. You're just begging. But it is the most humbling thing you can ever do. Because if you really want to serve, shouldn't you have to really put yourself out there and ask for everything and tell everything? That's the beautiful part about it. That's the part that I think makes a difference. And you are developing a relationship with every single person that comes in front of you.
So I want to go back to something you said a little bit ago about how it didn't matter to you whether or not Donald Trump was going to run, that you knew you were the best person. You went out there every day to make your case, make a case for your vision for the future. And voters went in a different direction. Why, I guess, is my question. What did you learn about both your party and the country by going out there, making that compelling case, and having them go in a different place?
I mean, look, at the end of the day, the people decide, right? But I went out there and I strongly believed that we needed to start having mental competency tests. People thought that was a joke. I wasn't joking. And it was because I wasn't being disrespectful. We all know young 75-year-olds and old 75-year-olds. But I knew, honestly, looking at Joe Biden and knowing how hard it was to run for president, I knew that pressure and stress was a lot. And I knew that was too much to do. And that's also why I said a vote for Joe Biden's a vote for Kamala Harris. I never thought he would make it to the end. And then I said the party that gets rid of their 80-year-old candidate is going to be the party in the catbird seat. I knew just from town halls alone and everything, everybody wanted something newer, fresher, younger, energetic. They were worried. They wanted a worker. There was just that feel. So what I said was what I saw. and what I heard and what I was trying to do. At the end of the day, look, I'm very proud of the fact that we had 14 candidates. We defeated 13 of them. I had one more I wanted to get, and I couldn't get there. But it wasn't because I didn't try. And when we suspended, I had complete and total gratitude. I was grateful for my family for standing by me. I was grateful for my friends. I had the most rock star team. We were small and mighty, but they fought every day. And I was grateful for the millions of people who voted for me. And we left it all on the field. There was nothing else I could have done. I knew we had done everything possible. So I was very proud and just grateful to have been able to have that opportunity.
What about the process? So, I heard it in New Hampshire all the time from the grassroots. Why won't she go harder? And so describe the slow and steady, because it is a brilliant strategy and you outlasted everyone. And so take us through, we worked together for the first time in 2022. She came up to New Hampshire with General Don Baldock. And I remember the general saying, you got to get to Nikki's team. She prosecuted the case against Maggie Hassan better than I've been able to do myself. And so there's such raw talent. And so what was the mindset in town halls, getting yourself prepared, and the slow, steady?
I always love town halls because I need to feel the energy. I need to look you in the eye. I need to see what you're thinking, whether I'm connecting to you or not. Commercials really do the most, right? That's how you get the masses. But you don't know what people are feeling until you're on the ground and you can see it. So town halls was the way to do it. 14 candidates. I got in. I was the first one, right? And then everybody else had to get in. So, but once they got in, the goal was, everybody wanted me to hit Trump. So if I had hit Trump from the very beginning, then all of that, it would have been a waste, honestly, a waste. It would have dragged us down really early. It would have distracted us really early. The goal was slow and steady wins the race. You take out one at a time. Take them out one at a time. And so the ball moved every time. He was the last ball, and I knew he'd be the last one. My goal was to be the last one standing against him, and that's what we did. But we did it by focusing on everybody else. So, it wasn't about bashing him or not bashing him. On policy, if you look on the debate stage, I called him out for spending. I called him out for certain things that happened. I had no problem doing that on policy. But I didn't need to go hit him as a person. I needed to go get the other 12 guys out so we could have the opportunity to really have that debate.
Consistency in politics is something that, you talk to a candidate and they get anxious. They don't want to give the same speech over and over again. I got a new audience. I got to do something. Your stump speech stayed the same from the day you announced almost to the day you suspended. And it was marvelous to watch because as a staffer, we knew when we had to get up, and foreign policy meant the cameras were almost ready and we were going to do some photos. But how that was I think it helped you a lot because your debate answers were plucked straight from your stump speech. Was that on purpose?
It's in politics, you have to have message discipline. It's not about what you're feeling that day. It's not that trust me, it's not easy. You get bored of hearing your voice over and over again. It was not fun to have to keep doing it. But every time I gave it, I felt it every single time, what I was saying and how I was connecting. But if I would have strayed, a couple of things would have happened. It would have let the press know, let's see if she has a moment. You don't want that. If you're going to have a moment, it's on your terms, not on their terms. The second thing is you need to be consistent so that people know what to expect of you. They're coming. They want to know where you are on healthcare. They want to know where you are on education. They want to know on national security. They want to know on the border. They want to know on the economy. Tell them what they want. And guess what? Everywhere you go, they want to know those same things. So you have to keep telling them. And then what happens is you learn a lot from your town halls because when they ask questions, all of a sudden you look at the stump speech and you go, I don't address that in the stump speech. And so I would tweak it at times when I realized there was a hole or I needed to fill it or whatever. But it was message discipline matters.
Look, I'm a Democrat, so I don't pretend to understand
And we love you anyway. We love you anyway.
I don't pretend to understand the Republican Party, but I've worked against it for a long time. And it seems to be going through a realignment of sorts right now. As a Democrat, I don't recognize today's Republican Party as being the same one from a decade or two ago when I first started. Is it the same party?
First, I have to say the Democrats are going through the same thing.
Yes.
You know, I think that's the roller coaster of the party structure. I mean, it is what happens. You know, we've seen that big progressive movement come into the Democrats, and I actually think after this election, Democrats are going to self-correct a little bit, and I think you'll see Republicans self-correct. That's what parties do after elections. No, I think both parties have changed, and I think there's a lot of factors that go into play with that. I have often said, if you look at, I was elected in the Tea Party aspect, 2010 as governor, and that was when it was taxed enough already. You know, and the majority of Americans are like, what am I paying for? I'm not seeing a return on my investment. What is government's not functioning? So majority of people. By 2012, 2014, it started fringing out. It got weird, right? And all of a sudden there were these weird issues that the Tea Party was on. And then the rest of the Tea Party was like, that's not me. And it shifted. And so by the time you got to 2014, they were electing people that could win a primary, but not a general. And I think if you look even at MAGA, MAGA today is very different than MAGA in 2016. MAGA in 2016 was very much frustrated with government intrusion, not trusting government. It was slow, it was weak, you felt like they weren't getting anywhere. And so that has shifted and it's moved out. And, you know, I say the same thing about the Democrats. I look at that and this progressive wing has come in. And, you know, so I think parties shift based on what's happened. No, the Republican Party has changed. What I always hope and will always fight for is the core principles of the Republican Party need to be there. It's the idea of freedom. It's the idea of capitalism. It's the idea of making sure that, you know, government was intended, you know, to protect the rights and freedoms of the people. It was never meant to be all things to all people. It's national security, preventing wars. It's making sure that, you know, we focus on those things. You know, conservative policy. I look at the debt now and I'm like, that's not Republican. And that happened with Republicans as much as it happened with Democrats. So the core principles are what I hope we can always go back to. But yeah, I think that, you know, we're seeing a lot happen. The difference I like to think about is if you look at the Democrats, very disciplined, very, very disciplined, to the point that the progressives have said, we don't like what Harris says, but we'll fight about it after the election. Republicans have missed that part because they still have different factions within the Republican Party. And guess what? You need all of them and then some to win an election. And that's the part I wish we could get Republicans to remember. You can't go and call someone MAGA or non-MAGA or Rhino or whatever and sit there and hit them in a general election because you don't have that luxury. Instead, you should be doing everything you can to get, and what we fought for in our campaign, suburban women, independents, conservative Democrats. You need a bigger bubble to win an election. And that's the part that I feel like the party will figure out. And, you know, I think if we see Trump win, I think we'll continue to see it go in the direction it's going. If we see Harris win, I think you'll see a self-correction in the Republican Party. I think if you see Trump win, you're going to see a self-correction in the Democrat Party. It's kind of the nature of what happens.
Yeah, the political parties, especially, you know, the Democrats are in a little bit of a civil war because of Gaza and things like that. So you're exactly right. I think back to the Tea Party, and I think about the conversations you and I had in New Hampshire as we were going to South Carolina. And there were so many people that had moved to South Carolina since you were governor. And one of the things we talked about was reminding them that you were a Tea Party conservative. Because Tea Party conservatives, I mean, a lot of people don't in this room, you might not even know what the Tea Party was. But I mean, they were conservative. And so
Fiscal discipline was mainly, it was very big on fiscal discipline.
Yeah, and so it's very interesting to watch kind of the shifting dynamics. But I mean, you were at the forefront back in the day, but that's how rapidly political parties can change.
No, and it's interesting because even though I was and still am conservative, they now call me a moderate Republican. My policies are literally the same as they were in the Tea Party. We have different issues, but the core is still the same. But that's the shift of the Republican Party, is I think it's moved in that direction.
And I want to pull on this thread just a little bit longer. As we are talking about this question, afterwards we're going to invite you all into the conversation, so feel free to start lining up at the mic. Wow.
I mean, really?
But quietly. No, but I want to pull on this thread a little bit. I'm really struck by this because one of the things we focus on a lot here at the Institute is how can we work through polarization, right? That we are incredibly polarized. Now, our politics have always been polarized, right? Like Adams v. Jefferson, we're throwing some pretty sharp elbows at one another. But hearing you talk, it strikes me that in order to win a primary, we have to pull further apart, it seems. And it kind of sticks there too often as you move into a general election. So I guess what I'm really trying to ask is, like, how do we, with the way our current primary structure, and I'm not just talking presidential, right? Like, this is true at the congressional level, all over. Within the current primary structure, how do we move past that, running to the base, in order to get past polarization afterwards?
It's a really important question because if you watched me in the primary campaign, if we had made it past the primary to the general, you wouldn't have seen me act any different in a general than I was in a primary. Because in the primary, you're talking about, I focused on issues, and the part that has really made it more polarizing is the media. Because what's happened, the media suddenly wants the most ridiculous thing, wants the most salacious thing on both sides. And then they run with that. So what you're doing is you're getting politicians to think they've got to say something crazy to get any media attention. So people have started to just be extreme on both sides to be heard. To me, what I think is really important is when we had those town halls, I never assumed it was just a Republican group. I always knew I didn't know what the experiences were in any of it. What I also knew is, just like this room, I don't know what your political affiliation is, but I know we agree on 80% of things. It's the 20% we fight over. And so for me, what I wanted to do was campaign in a way that I don't think you should have any judgment. If you think differently than I do, I respect you exactly the same. I'm going to tell you what I believe, and it's up to you to decide whether you trust me or not, because I think elections need to be about trust. You have to be able to trust that what I tell you today is going to be the same thing once I'm in office. And so, yeah, I think it's getting polarizing, but I think when it gets polarizing like that, I think it creates distrust among the American people. And look, I think you just have to keep doing the right thing and let that go forward, and just know that I have faith. I think we're going to be okay. You've heard me say this before. America has an amazing ability to self-correct. Sometimes we have to hit rock bottom to know where up is. We're almost there. But we will get there. And I know that we are going to be okay. It's just messy right now, but I don't think it's going to last.
I could geek out on this topic of polarization all night, but let's bring in some good questions now. When I point to you, tell us your name, where you're from, what you're studying. Try to keep your question on point, and please try to frame your question in the form of a question. All right, let's start over here.
Hello, Ambassador Haley.
Hi.
My name is Matt Buscarino. I am a sophomore in the College of Arts and Sciences studying government and history. During your most recent campaign for president, you remarked, quote, "In politics, the herd mentality is enormously strong. A lot of Republican politicians have surrendered to it. Of course, many of the same politicians who now publicly embrace Trump privately dread him. They know what a disaster he has been and will continue to be for our party. They're just too afraid to say it out loud," end quote. Now that you have suspended your campaign, you have frequently downplayed his impact on your party and has even gone so far as to offer yourself as a surrogate for his campaign. My question to you is this: would it be fair to categorize you as one of the many politicians who privately dread him, who know what a disaster he has been and will continue to be for your party, and are you just too afraid to say it out loud?
So, thank you for that question, Matt. What I have said since the election, since what happened, I said everything that I said on the campaign trail, I stand by. I said it because I believed it. I said it because I was telling the truth to everyone. Since then, people have voted. I'm a voter now. I have to make a decision between two. It is Harris or it is Trump. I don't have the luxury of dealing with anything else. So I am not going for the person I like. I'm going for when my daughter complains about groceries, I care about that. When my son is worried about getting a job and how he's going to afford insurance, I worry about that. When my husband is a military spouse and I know he's been deployed and I worry about what's happening, preventing wars, I care about that. When I look at what's happening on the border and safety, I care about that. So as a voter, I align more with Trump's policies than Harris's policies. And that's what I choose to do. I'm not voting on style. I'm voting on substance. And I, as a voter, have to make the same decision you do. And that's the decision I make. But I have always stood by everything that I said. But at the end of the day, I'm an American, and I get the right to choose who I'm going to vote for. And that's what I'm doing. The Republican Party has chosen.
All right, let's go over here.
My name is Will Sever, and I'm a sophomore in the School of Foreign Service studying Science, Technology, International Affairs, and Chemistry. Thank you so much, Madam Ambassador, for joining us. I'm wondering how your time at the United Nations, an institution that is built around dialogue, sometimes between diametrically opposed groups, shaped your campaigning and conversations during the primary season, whether it was at a cattle call in Iowa or a diner in New Hampshire.
It really was, many of you know that I think the United Nations is a farce. I mean, it really is just such a mess. And the reason is the premise of the United Nations was good, right? The premise was if you put 193 countries in a room in the name of peace, good things will happen. But the problem is those 193 countries all have different sets of values. They all have different priorities. So that's why the UN doesn't work. And, what I learned at the UN was who our enemies are and what they're capable of, who our friends are, and how they had our back when they needed to have our back. And at the end of the day, focus on how do we go deal with the bad in the world and try and have moral clarity in the process. And I think that played out because when we were in Iowa, what were farmers talking about? China buying up their farmland. China buying up agricultural areas. When we got to New Hampshire, what were they talking about? The border, fentanyl flow, where the fentanyl was coming from. The fact that China was sending the ingredients to Mexico, Mexico was sending it over. When you get to South Carolina, you're thinking of manufacturing and what does it mean to have made in the USA versus somewhere else. So every state I go to, foreign policy is still a part of it. And I think that what I do want to say is those that say, that are getting more nationalist and all that, you should. You should love America. We should always care about America because every other country does the same thing. Having said that, don't ever think we can be so arrogant to think we don't need friends and that we don't have to work to keep our freedoms. Because when you've seen the enemy, when you've dealt with China, when you've dealt with Russia, when you've dealt with Iran, when you've dealt with North Korea, and you see how much they hate us and what they're capable of doing, you don't forget it. And that's why you see me constantly pushing on national security and preventing war, because I know how much they want to demolish the West. Thank you.
Hi, Ambassador Haley. Thank you so much for coming to speak with us today. I'm Kat. I'm a junior majoring in international politics. I grew up in Singapore, but my parents now live in Dallas. So you just got into this a little bit on the national security vein. But coming into this race, there were a lot of conflicts going on throughout the world and a lot of conflicts continuing to break out throughout it. And I know you talked a lot about keeping messaging consistent, which I can imagine would be a little bit challenging as some of these situations arose. So I was just wondering how you and the campaign adapted and worked some of these messages into your platform as you kind of had to, make your priorities clear on, from a national security standpoint, especially given your time on the National Service Council.
Thank you, Kat, I appreciate that. I think that what's important, even when I would do, town halls, and a lot of people don't necessarily care as much about national security as they do the cost of groceries and all, those priorities come in. I always felt it was important to talk about it. So initially, I was talking about Russia and Ukraine. Then it became talking about Russia, Ukraine, and Israel, and what was happening with Gaza. And then it came to where we were talking about Taiwan and China. So I think it's always important to stay current and talk about the issues that you have. The reason you have town hall questions is what you didn't cover, you do that. But I think national security always has to be part of the conversation. Even if it's not everyone's number one, it just matters. Peace matters. Being able to protect America matters. Being able to know who your enemies are matters. And so I would always talk about it. And it's interesting because those, for example, who didn't think we should be helping Ukraine and had views on that, after they heard me speak, the whole town hall nodded their head because you don't get it from the media. They tell you what they want you to think, but they don't tell you why. And everybody deserves to know the why. And I think Americans are smart. When given the facts, they make good decisions, but they have to know the facts. And so I always made that a part of everything I always talked about. Thank you.
Hi, Ambassador Haley.
Hi. Love your sweater, love your hat.
Thank you so much. My uncle, who lives in South Carolina, actually gave me the hat 4 years ago.
I love that.
So I've been a big fan. I'm from Pennsylvania, Chester County. I had the opportunity to vote for you in the primary.
Thank you.
But like you, I intend to vote for Donald Trump in the next election. However, many of your other supporters don't feel the same way. What do you say to them? And I've seen things on Twitter like the Haley for Harris voters campaign, as well as people in the Lincoln Project, and some of your former campaign staff has also endorsed Kamala Harris. So what do you say to them who I don't feel are voting in the best interest for our policy?
So none of my campaign staff has come out for Harris. The media has said it's campaign staff. What it is you have co-chairs, just like you have Student for Haley co-chairs, whatnot. We had well over 150 co-chairs. Less than 10 have moved to Harris. But the media wants to make that a bigger thing. And so they are. But at the end of the day, I think that I stand by what I have said is both candidates have to pay attention to that 10% that is going to decide this election. And that is suburban women, independents, college educated. They still don't know who they're voting for. And that's where candidates have to go and ask for that vote. They've got to ask for it. They've got to appeal for it. You can talk about the issues at the end of the day. But again, when I say this goes back to trust, they want to know that you asked for the vote, and they want to know they can trust you to give you the vote. So it's overinflated. I think you can see the majority of mine are either with Trump or haven't decided if they're going to vote. That's more of the concern is do they stay home or do they vote? Thank you.
Hi, Ambassador. My name is Jason Goodman. I'm a Master of Public Policy and MBA student from Los Angeles. I respect that you preferred President Trump's policies, but after January 6th, you said of President Trump, he went down a path he shouldn't have, and we shouldn't have followed him, and we can't let that ever happen again. Since then, he has both continued to deny he lost the 2020 election and refused to accept the 2024 outcome if he loses. So my question is, why is the path that President Trump is currently going down any different than the path he took in 2020?
First of all, I stand by everything I've said. I don't take anything back. When I tell you something, I mean it. I say it. It's what happened. I think he's wrong to say that that the election was stolen. You had multiple courts look at it. No one found proof of it. I have always said that. I think he lost the election. And I think going into this next election, if anything, we want Americans to feel like they know what they're going to get. My biggest concern is that we won't have the results on Election Day. And I want every single state, I don't care whether you're red or you're blue, you owe it to the American people to give them the results on Election Day. That's part of what America needs. And a lot of states made some corrections on what they need to do that. But we've got to get that, because that's about trust in an election, is being able to do that. But look, I think it's not helpful for him to talk about whether he thinks the election was stolen. The country has moved on for that. And I think it's important for him to say, get out and vote. We need you to get out and vote. Everybody's vote is their voice. It should be more positive. Thank you.
Hi, Ambassador Haley. I'm Lucy. I'm a sophomore in the college studying government. Considering your time at the United Nations and your stances on foreign policy, how do you believe the U.S. should balance its relationships with China and Russia while still maintaining alliances with democratic nations?
It's a great question. Thank you, Lucy. I think that, I'll give you an example of my time at the UN. So at the UN, I sat on the Security Council. Security Council counts for the majority of the work for, those ambassadors that sit on it. You have 5 vetoes. The U.S. gets a veto, UK, France, Russia, China. Every week or every other week, I would always try and get us together, all of us, Security Council, Russia, China, everybody in there, to get together for just like an hour reception where we wouldn't talk about work. And it was my way of keeping them close, knowing what they were up to, knowing all those things. You've got to keep the talking happening, because if you're not talking, you don't know what they're doing. And so it's important that we always have, conversations with them, but you have to know who to trust and who you can't. I mean, all you have to do is look at China. It is our #1 national security threat. And everything they're doing is showing us that. And if we continue to ignore it, we're going to pay the price for that. You look at the fact they're buying up our farmland. That's not by accident. They've got their eyes on our agriculture. You look at TikTok, and I know you're all on it, and I wish you weren't, but the data collection they get from that and the push of information they get, it's the cheapest form of warfare. You look at the Chinese malware that we know right now hit the U.S. government. Our government can't find it. They haven't been able to detect it, but what they know is it impacts our infrastructure. Think our power grid, our water, all of that infrastructure. You've got Russia blinding satellites, right? You've got Iranians hacking. The FBI sat down with me during the campaign and said, we see meddling with your campaign from the Iranians. They were trying to influence away from me towards other candidates. The foreign intrusion that has happened in our country is its own war. Look at the fentanyl coming across the border. I mean, all of these things are happening, and we're acting like it's not. And my biggest concern is, if you don't know the foreign intrusion is real, if you don't believe in it, they're going to continue to divide us, and they're going to continue to do misinformation. This really came to light in 2016 when they said the Russians meddled in the election. It wasn't that the Russians changed the vote. What they did was they went on Facebook and started doing these rallies. The rallies were racial in nature. And Americans showed up to rallies that the Russians set up, and the Americans didn't know it. And through that, when you see these divides, I promise you, I would love, and our social media companies have yet to do this, I bet you 60% of those on social media are bots. I bet they are foreign actors. And they don't just do it here, they do it with the European elections. They do it in every single democracy. So when you look at what China and Russia and Iran and North Korea are trying to do to destabilize us, the least thing we could do is acknowledge the threat is real and start dealing with it. And I feel like America still just thinks if we don't talk about it, it'll go away. It's not going away. They're as determined and motivated as they ever have been. We will be okay if we just wake up to the threats.
But can I just follow up on that real quick? Because it's such an interesting point. How do we deal with it? How do you want social media platforms to deal with it, but also protect, fight against censorship or protect free speech?
You want freedom of speech. We're not talking about taking anything away from freedom of speech. But you go to Facebook, Instagram, any social media, they know. Why has no one ever asked them how many foreign bots are on there? The reason they're not telling you is if they were to take out all the foreign bots, guess what? The value of their company just went down because the value of their company is based on the number of people on it. So the companies don't want to go and acknowledge the bots, and the American people have never held them accountable to say they're literally dividing our country. They're literally spreading lies. And we're allowing them to do it. You're allowing Russians to have fun with us. You're allowing the Chinese to have fun with us. You're allowing the Iranians to have fun with us. And you're not going to hold these companies accountable to do it? And then you've got TikTok, where China is having a field day with it. And all you have to do is look at the messaging that they have done and the timeliness of how they do that messaging. And you had Trump say he was going to ban TikTok, along with the Republicans. You had Biden say he was going to ban TikTok, along with the Democrats. And now they're both on TikTok. And Harris is on TikTok. And what does that mean? It means that they're choosing politics over national security. That's the concern I have. And they shouldn't just ban you from TikTok. Tell the American people what you know. I would love for them to explain to you that when you look at your phone, the way they do this is they know what you're looking at and searching. They know what you're clicking on. They're collecting that data and they're using it to push things to you to see in another direction. And then they start sending things that are misinformation to get you angry and to get you to not like each other. And they're winning. Look at our country. That division, don't blame it on one person. Blame it on a country. And all you have to do is go to the UK and do that. Do you know, in India, TikTok was causing so much social disruption, they banned it altogether because of how dangerous it had become. We need to stop with the what's fun and what's good in the moment. And we need leaders to say, wait a minute, we at least need to inform the American people of what we know.
So we are coming up on the end of our time. So for those of you that were in line, I'm sorry. Come to Rick Wiley's discussion group in office hours, and he'll answer every single one of your questions.
You come.
But I want to close with this question. You are sitting in an auditorium full of people. It's ingrained in Georgetown that we are all men and women for others. There's a strong sense of public service in this room. People tend not to like politics very much right now.
I get it.
What can they do to make people start liking it again?
First of all, I want to say we need you. We need you involved. We need you engaged. Whether you choose to do that Republican or Democrat, to me, it doesn't matter. I just want you to use the power of your voice. I mean, I'd love it if you were all Republicans, but I know you're not. But you're using... Using the power of your voice matters, but using the power of your voice for good matters even more. And so what I will tell you is you've got people on both sides of the aisle on different issues. Listen before you speak. Understand why someone thinks what they think, because usually it's because of an experience. Usually it's because of a life story. Usually it's because of a perception they've been told that maybe isn't right. But if you're going aggressively at them and you care more about what you say than what they hear, you've missed the whole point. Because the goal is, how do you get people to see the way you think? And you do it not through saying you're wrong. You do it by telling your life experiences. What makes you feel this way about whether you're pro-life or pro-choice? What makes you feel this way about Israel and Gaza? Why do you care about what's happening at the border? Maybe you should ask the question of, but why? It takes longer. It's more work. But if you want to make the difference at the end of the day, and I truly believe y'all are going to be the group that saves us, you have a responsibility to do it the right way. It's easy to spew hate on Twitter, but it's lazy and it's short-sighted. It takes a whole lot more to sit down in a group of people that you would be uncomfortable sitting down with and calmly telling why you believe what you believe, and you should stand by it. You should be proud of it, but listening to why they believe what they believe and be okay with it. And understand that, look, you can have that conversation, but at the end of the day, if you do just that, you will make a dramatic difference in the tone and culture of our country. But it takes every single person realizing they've got to be part of the solution.
I want to thank all of you for spending some of your evening with us. I want to thank Rick for leading this conversation with me, but most importantly, I want to thank Nikki Haley for,
Thank you
for
so
being
much
at Georgetown.
for taking the time to come out. Thank you.